Anyway, I can't sleep. I'm beginning to believe in love. When I feel supremely connected, usually I am alone and usually walking somewhere, I touch someone and I feel happy to touch them in a manner I can't describe aptly, like I'm so happy they're there and light fills my body. When I can no longer touch them, I make a mental image for a second that they are supremely happy, and then I don't believe in them anymore, except in the abstract, as I'm doing now. Leave the rest of us out of it. Gentleness comes from repetition, the blankness and largeness of the space that comes between men. What happened to it? There be sour notes and trees in the image. If you're going to kill, do it. Don't decide to do it to take them out and put them out. As a society, we practice getting into neutral or positive territory. Do we focus on the justice system? Yet when thinking about justice, I feel hunger. Can you imagine that? You touch the justice system. It ought to rely on balance and fluctuation rather than the hardness of the institution, which doesn't get at humanity. No, you can't skip the steps to humanity. The psyche is disorganized. That statement was originally about Sean's images, but now we're somewhere different. And that's Sean Leonardo, the artist Sean Leonardo. Opening a portal by a groove of transcendence to a vision of paradise. Nonetheless, what have we transcended? If anything, the voices I hear are markedly plain spoken. At another dingy carpet concert, this one in a basement, I heard the lyric, when I was a kid, I fell down. This here was sung by a guitarist whose act was preceded by a reading from Finnegan's Wake and succeeded by a death metal outfit whose lead singer yelled into a microphone made somehow out of bone. There were Christmas lights there too. If the future isn't a viable option, then what I have is right now. Throughout my days, I again lose bodily awareness, not by I'm lost in thought, but by how beautiful and totally absurd it is, how uneventful and awe-inspiring. I feel more and more like a child. I feel more and more like I am in mourning for a death that hasn't happened yet. Left to right, Marshall Allen, John Gilmore, Ronnie Boykins, Ricky Murray, Sun Ra, Walter Strickland, and Billy Mitchell, 1960. Sun Ra and his orchestra were known, amongst other things, for their elaborate space garb, the sequins, the ancient Egyptian symbolism, the face paint, the full-length capes. These were space suits the band wore to accompany them on their mission to travel the spaceways. I drew inspiration from the early ILC Dover spacesuit prototypes crafted in the mid-60s. I also drew inspiration from artist and Black futurist Nick Cave, known for his sound suits, large wearable sculptures whose bedazzling feathers and contours are meant to obscure the race, class, and gender of their inhabitants. The sound suits, however, quickly became more music than costumery. The orchestra's outfits, after all, were only subsidiary elements of a larger mission. Sun Ra's music was above all paradisal music. It was music that, by the process of telemolecularization, would transport listeners to another dimension. Thus began my own search for Sonny Blunt's contemporary musical descendants. Imagine the instant the race began, create the corresponding soundscape. One of my favorite moments in A Joyful Noise, Robert Mugabe's 1980 documentary, is when Sun Ra advocates for governments to give constitutional rights to angels. It's a lot more going on here than we think. Could we elaborate on that? terrifying. The house was real scary and dark. I can't remember if it was summer or winter anyhow. I'm pretty sure I was wearing a backpack, one of those green canvas ones that I take to school, and I had a baseball cap on, like being in the pilot seat of an airplane or in a bed or on a beach somewhere. Anyway, paradise is the sum of places these days. If we have to have it, we're the worst. Well, I'd come to offer any music where Rain Shorter and Joe Zawinul play the theme together, by the phrases are so deep and the notes that are sustained are usually beautiful harmonies interrupted by staccato chirping, a big glowing synthesizer and a honking reed instrument blending together. The synthesizer is being strained to sound natural and the sax is played with such exactness and precision that it could be programmed. That's paradise. Mechanical and silicone, darkness and blackness. They're not bad things at all. Blackness and blackout produce beautiful things like a diamond. It's a piece of coal anyhow when we put pressure on it. What happens in our intimacy of the music? There's so much of Black history there. Sampling is such a heavy matter in Chicago footwork, though again, melanin is real heavy. The disorientation was thrilling. Skipping ahead a bit. So there were parts of I Need Music that were based on interviews that I had done with musicians. And so there are places where the I doesn't refer to me or things that I've experienced. I mean, that's true of all poetry, but I wanted to preface this part in particular by saying that. This Toni Morrison line really struck me after Christian Taylor's death, because we found his Twitter account and it was so expressive and it feels like a digital grave. I kind of included it in a song I made last month, a sort of dirge I made for him and other young Black men and women and trans folks that have been killed lately. In other interviews of mine, I've talked about protecting the Black female capacity for pleasure by storing it online, and about the existence of a place where one can't die, namely the internet feels like a kind of protection, but to me the internet also feels like a dangerous neighborhood for Black bodies. I believe pictures of dead Black bodies from online news sources are distributed so carelessly. Totally, the internet can be a triggering space, but the internet is a groove more malleable than meat space. I can't curve a bullet anyhow. I can change my settings so that I never touch a Black body lying in the street again. I can ask that my friends provide trigger warnings, which I believe we're better about, at least in the online communities I'm a part of. So in a way, the danger can be mitigated. Here, in a way, it really can't in meat space. How has our devotion to the internet changed over time? Have we always been aware of it as a safe space? Still growing up queer, the internet was always the space where I could mostly engage the sum of myself. Meet space can feel like a constant compromise, trying to feel comfortable while being sure not to make them folks uncomfortable, especially as a Black female person. Worrying about the safety of the viewer in relation to an art practice can be a trap. I don't believe in making work that would do harm to someone else unless that soul feels harmed when they are intimate with somebody foreign to them. I've made folks uncomfortable before with my practice. Maybe it made no sense to them or it didn't relate to their view of the race, and could be those feelings made them feel fragile or less safe, and could be that means they're experiencing new words and it's okay, but I'd never do anything to make I'd never make anything to intentionally trigger someone else. That's not what we need in this time in culture. When the race ends, another race is going to be constructed, maybe 2 or 3 races. New breath going to come from those races, and the 10 million things going to start back up again. Or the 10 million things going to end when the sun explodes. It's a star. And all sentient beings going to cease to exist, and consciousness going to end. It could go either way. My devotion to absurdism starts with Camus and Jean Genet. I was really into Waiting for Godot and The Balcony in undergrad, and this notion of the absurd race. Absurdism tells us to make our own meaning and logic to keep us going, by the search for some cosmic sense gonna fail us. I'm thinking of Camus' essay on absurdity and suicide in particular. While it says a lot about science and logic and meaning, what affects me is his observation that the search for meaning and God lead men to suicide. Absurdism is the answer to that quest. I believe it is thinking into the alienated practitioner and the redundancy of everyday breath, and this here need for meaning to give breath purpose. It also talks about how human-centric our race views are. The truism, the sum of thought is anthropomorphic, has no other meaning. Likewise, the psyche that aims to follow reality can consider itself satisfied only by reducing itself to terms of thought. If man realized that the universe, like him, can love and suffer, it would be reconciled. If thought discovered in the shimmering mirrors of phenomena eternal relations capable of summing them up and summing themselves up in a single principle, then would be seen an intellectual joy of which the youth of the blessed would be but a ridiculous imitation. The nostalgia for unity, that appetite for the absolute, illustrates the essential impulse of the human drama. But the fact of that nostalgia's existence does not imply that it is to be immediately satisfied, for if bridging the gulf that separates desire from conquest, we assert with Parmenides the reality of the one, whatever it may be, we fall into the ridiculous contradiction of a psyche that asserts total unity and prices by its real assertion its own difference in the diversity it claimed to resolve. This vicious circle is plenty to stifle our hopes. I believe we live in a fucked race where some folks gonna never get what they pray for, no matter how hard they pray or how blessed they tell themselves they are. My mom prayed not to go to prison and still ended up in prison. The real idea of blessedness makes it more difficult to reconcile the apparent lack of control that a lot of us have over our lives. In particular, the lack of control to stop ourselves from being controlled, except by existing in spaces where we're a bit more impervious. I run into this protest of absurdity a lot when I try to follow the forces that create helplessness in my breath and practice, etc. And it seems it's that seeking comfort might also, in a way, cause me discomfort, by it forces me to continually confront the existence of things that are trying to control me. I guess I'm circling back to where we were before in comfort. Just there.